You learned by the time you were 7 to read the sound of a door closing, not what the door was doing, but what the person closing it was feeling. Loud meant one thing. Soft and slow meant something else, often worse. By the time the footsteps reached the kitchen, you already had a working forecast for the next 2 hours of your life. You weren't being paranoid. You were doing what kids do when their nervous system has correctly identified that the adult coming through the door is the weather, and the weather decides everything. If you grew up in a house where a parent's mood determined the temperature of the entire home, where one wrong word could turn a quiet evening into a long one, where you learned to read voices, footsteps, and faces with the precision most adults reserve for emergencies, your psychology is shaped by something very specific. And it's not just the trauma response everyone is talking about online. The kids who walked on eggshells did not just become anxious adults. They built a perceptual and emotional skill set that is, in adulthood, almost impossible to acquire any other way. And it is more useful than most of you realize. Here's the thing nobody talks about. Most kids grow up in homes where adult moods are roughly stable. Parents have bad days, sure, but the floor doesn't move under the kids' feet. A cranky morning is followed by a normal afternoon. Conflict, when it happens, is contained, recoverable, and predictable. That stability is what allows a child's nervous system to develop a baseline of safety, the assumption that the room they are in is on average fine. But some kids didn't get that. The adult in your home was unpredictable, or volatile, or quietly punitive in ways that could turn on a dime. Your nervous system didn't get to develop a baseline of safety because there was no baseline. Instead, it developed something else, a constant low-grade scanning system. Eyes on the parent, ears on the room, a part of your brain permanently tuned to the adult's emotional weather because reading it correctly was the difference between a quiet evening and a hard one. This wasn't a quirk, it was an adaptation. Your nervous system did exactly what it was supposed to do, given the room it was supposed to do it in. In 2024, clinical psychologist Dr. Kim Sage coined the term eggshell parenting on social media to describe homes where children learn to behave around an adult's unstable emotions. And the term went viral, accumulating hundreds of millions of views across platforms. But the research underneath it is much older. In the 1970s, psychiatrist Lenore Terr's foundational work on childhood trauma identified a pattern she called Type 2 trauma, repeated, lower-grade exposures to unpredictable danger that don't look like classic trauma, but reshape a child's nervous system more thoroughly than any single event could. Decades later, neuroscientist Bruce Perry's research on developmental trauma found that children raised in unpredictable emotional environments develop measurably enhanced threat detection, faster pattern recognition for facial expressions, faster reaction to tone shifts, faster anticipation of emotional escalation. Their brains weren't broken. Their brains were optimized for the room they grew up in. That optimization, Perry's research showed, doesn't go away when the danger does. It just becomes the cognitive style of an adult who can read a room with surgical precision, whether or not the room needs reading. Picture this. You're 10. You're sitting at the dining room table doing homework. Your parent comes home from work. You hear the keys hit the bowl by the door. You hear the bag drop. You hear the cabinet open in the kitchen, the sigh, the way the water runs into the glass. You have not seen their face yet. You don't need to. By the time they walk into the room where you're sitting, you have already adjusted 3 things. Your posture, the volume of your voice, the list of things you are going to say. You greet them with the exact tone the room can afford tonight. They notice nothing. You go back to your homework. You are 10 years old, and you have just executed a piece of emotional labor that most adults, including the one who just walked in, will never quite learn how to do. But here's where it gets interesting. The hypervigilance, the part that looks like a problem, has been quietly building one of the most refined perceptual systems an adult can have. People who grew up walking on eggshells have unusually accurate threat detection in social and emotional environments. You walk into a meeting and clock the political tension in the first 30 seconds. You sit down at a dinner and feel the unspoken thing between 2 people across from you. You hear, in the first sentence of a phone call, that something is wrong. Most people don't catch any of this. You catch it constantly, and in adulthood, when the threats are professional or relational rather than physical, the same system that protected you as a kid protects you now. But there's more going on than just detection. People who grew up on eggshells tend to develop unusual emotional foresight. You don't just read what's happening, you predict what's about to happen. You see a conflict 3 sentences before it lands. You know which conversation is going to go sideways before anyone else does. You arrange your week around moods you can sense forming in the people around you. This is the same anticipatory skill that air traffic controllers, ER triage nurses, and elite negotiators spend years training. You got it the long way, in a kitchen, by 9. And here's the kicker. The overfunctioning that came out of the hypervigilance often grew into what this channel has been calling productive guilt. You learned that being useful kept the room calm. You learned that achievement was a way to manage someone else's mood. You learned, very early, that worth was something you produced rather than something you simply had. As an adult, this shows up as reliability, drive, and an output capacity most people will never touch. But it also shows up as the inability to rest. The output is real. The cost is real. Both have the same root, and this shows up in ways you might not even notice. Adults who grew up on eggshells often have an unusually clean relationship with their own moods around other people. You don't take your stress out on the people around you because you know exactly what it feels like to be on the receiving end. You don't make your bad day someone else's bad day. You don't expect other people to manage your emotions for you. This is not a small thing. It is, in fact, a level of emotional accountability most adults never quite reach, and you reached it at 8, because the alternative was being the kind of adult you grew up afraid of. Now let's be honest, the cost is real, and it does not go away on its own. The same scanning system that protected you keeps running long after the threat is gone. You read tension into rooms that don't have any. You apologize for emotional weather that has nothing to do with you. You over-explain. You over-prepare. You sometimes mistake a partner's bad day for the start of a storm that, in their household, would never have happened. Knowing the wiring is real is the first step. Trusting that the room you are in now is not the room you grew up in is the long, slow work of the rest. But for the people who learn to keep the perception and slowly let some of the alarm go, here's what you actually carry. You have a perceptual system most adults will never match. You have emotional foresight, social pattern recognition, calm under pressure, and integrity around your own moods. You have an output capacity that built most of what you've built. None of these are accidents. They are the inheritance of a kid who paid attention because they had to, and who is now, as an adult, paying attention to rooms that mostly are safe enough to stop scanning quite so hard. The work isn't to get rid of the wiring. The work is to slowly teach your nervous system that the door closing in the next room is just a door, and the person walking through it is, almost always, just a person. There's something quietly remarkable about people who grew up walking on eggshells. They tend to be the friend who notices the small thing before it becomes a big thing. They tend to be the partner who reads tone like a second language. They tend to be the colleague who feels the political weather of a workplace before anyone else even acknowledges it. They have spent their lives carrying a perceptual system most adults don't realize is a system, often without realizing it themselves. If you have spent your life vaguely guilty about how attuned you are to other people's moods, vaguely tired of how often the alarm goes off in rooms that are perfectly safe, this might be the moment to consider that the part of you that is always reading the room is not the broken part of you, it is the part that kept you safe, and it is now, very quietly, allowed to rest. You're not paranoid, you're not too sensitive, you're not too much. You're someone whose nervous system was trained very young to keep you safe in a room that wasn't, and the skill it built has been carrying you and the people you love ever since. If you find yourself recognizing pieces of your own psychology in these videos, that's the entire point of silent awareness. Subscribing is the quietest way to support what we're doing here, and it genuinely helps the channel keep growing. Hit the button if you want the next one to find you.